Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Gary Bertwistle, author of Who Stole My Mojo. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, mate. Nice to be here.
You know how hard it was to not say, yeah, baby, right after that?
Well, that is the origin of the book.
All right, you ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's do it. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing a book?
The most important piece of advice, I would say, is you've got to have your own point of view. If you don't have a point of view that can add value and or entertain a reader, then you are just going to be another book that may not even make the shelf. And here in Australia, sadly, I'm getting a book a week sent to me with potential guests for our podcast, the Mojo Radio Show. And I've got to say, Paul, it's really sad going through it. I feel sorry for the authors because you read these books and there is no point of difference. There is no perspective. There's no opinion. It's just cobbled together bits that I've read in other books from the last 20 years. And I'd say the best piece of advice is if you look in the mirror of truth and step back and say, if I was paying my money for this book, is there a real angle? Is there an opinion? Because if there isn't, the book is really going to struggle, and it just makes you sad as an author to say, I've got this thing, nobody wants it. And that can be more disheartening than it is empowering should the book go well.
Yeah, it's like you put your heart and soul into this book and nobody loves it. And I think that's one of the biggest fears out there with people wanting to share their story with the world, right? It's one of those things where, well, what if no one wants to read my book?
The hardest part is just being honest with yourself, because it's easy to put words down on paper. But you've really got to step back and say, do I have an opinion on this? That only comes from deep thought. It only comes from reflection. It only comes from true observations. And we use this word insight a lot, but quite often the insights we think are insights are just observations that everybody else has already made. You're just slow to the party. And I think it really comes from the people that are doing the best work, the great work right now, are the people who sit with the blank page. And they really contemplate long and hard about, what have I been seeing? What have I been hearing? What have I been feeling? And why is that so? And ideally having a contrarian view and having the courage to walk into dissent, because you should have an opinion that others aren't hearing, seeing, feeling. That's what makes a great book, when you've got something that provokes thought, as opposed to it's just another day where you're bumping down some more words and you're cobbling together a bunch of stuff you've read and heard and seen that other people have done. Well, I've kind of already got all that. So, and it is disheartening. It's disheartening to have a book that no one wants.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started the show earlier. Was, one of my main philosophies is you have to be able to share your story, because that's how you connect with someone. And I shared my example with you, talking about my health crisis and making those changes, and I wanted to share that story with the world. That's the biggest thing. You have to be able to connect. Nobody needs to hear another 500 quotes from Tony Robbins or Robert Kiyosaki or anyone like that, because they want to hear your story. They want to be able to connect with you. And that's the main thing. With writing a book, you need to be able to make that connection, whether it's writing fiction, nonfiction, whatever you're writing about. You have to be able to share your story and connect with someone. And that's the key.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more, mate. I think you're spot on.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
My observation today, in the last, say, 5 years, is that getting published isn't really the hard part. I think there are publishing houses who are putting out way too many books. You can self-publish. You can find hungry new publishers who'll take a chance. So I don't know if the publishing part's the hardest part. I think the hardest part for an author today is making sure that once you've got that point of view, that angle, once you've got that story that you just spoke of, I think the hardest part is building your own network that you can then market yourself to, because a lot of publishers you go to will do all the work until it's on the bookshelf. And the minute it's on the bookshelf, they'll turn to you and say, okay, now what are your networks? Where are you going to sell? Where are you speaking? How many people do you have as followers? And I have found that the most important part is before you start the process, make sure you got a point of difference. The second part is, whilst you are writing, build your network. Do the work building your own personal network through a solid, loyal following. Do the work on your socials. Get out and do speaking gigs. Build connections, particularly build an email database list. So do all those things at the same time, because when you launch, it will be a really valuable platform, because suddenly you'll have someone to talk to.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of launching, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches that has worked well. And I'd love for you to share both Who Stole My Mojo, and then also if you could tell us more about the was it the journal, the guide that you also did as a sequel to that?
The Mojo Journal, the thought-provoking journal, was probably the best illustration of how things have changed since I did my first book some 10 years ago, Who Stole My Mojo, to today. Now, all the things I've talked about so far worked for me with the Mojo Journal. Now, it wasn't a book and it wasn't a journal. It was a book inside a journal. So publishers said to me, look, we're not going to publish that because it's really, you should talk to the stationers. And I went to the stationers and they said, well, it's not really a journal, it's more of a book. You should speak to the publishers. And then an agent said to me, why don't you do it yourself? And being someone who works around innovation, creativity, well, nowadays they call it disruption, new ideas, I'd read about Kickstarter, but I thought, well, if I'm out there doing what I do and I haven't tried Kickstarter, it's a bit like Mark Twain said, that a man who's got a cat by the tail knows a lot more about cats than one who's just read about them. And so I thought, well, I'll have a go at Kickstarter. So I put all my work into building a network, which I think was probably the best thing I did. Was that although I had a product which was very different, because it had never been done before, a thought-provoking journal where it was 20 random stories spread with beautiful art through what you'd imagine a normal journal would be. So it was stuff to provoke thought rather than just a whole journal full of empty pages. And it was beautifully done by a young artist. And then I spent a lot of time building my network through particularly Twitter and LinkedIn. They were the two things that worked the best for me. And then I did it through this crowdfunding platform called Kickstarter. Now, the important ingredients there were the product was different. It was beautifully done. I had people way more talented than me to do beautiful art for it. We did a lovely video with a professional young kid that just had a great eye for it. It was a very deliberate brief as to what I wanted for it. And we put it on Kickstarter. And then thankfully the marketing plan through LinkedIn and Twitter worked for me. And all those things together came together to successfully get it funded through Kickstarter. And we're now in, I think, about to go in our fourth reprint, which would make it, in traditional sense, would make it a bestseller here in our country. But the nice thing is when you do it yourself, you control everything, and you've got people from anywhere around the world who just buy into your idea. And that's a really powerful thing when people who don't know you will buy into a concept.
So with crowdfunding, we've had a few guests on the show in the past talk about it. This is episode 331, and I believe probably this is the fourth episode that we've been able to have a conversation about Kickstarter and different crowdfunding concepts. What I'd like to ask you is, what advice would you have for those out there that want to do Kickstarter campaigns? Because as I'm sure you know, they're hit and miss. Sometimes they go really well like yours did, but sometimes not so well. So what are some of the things that you would give as advice to our audience so they can have a successful potential campaign?
I think your point before, Paul, is you've got to have your story right. You've got to have a story behind what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why it's different to anything else in the market at the present time. How is it going to add value? Why is it important for people to have this product? How does it enrich their life? The second part is you've got to have a really good video that outlines and answers all those questions. And I'd say in this day and age, having a book, having a journal, having work, it's got to be beautiful. We're becoming very, very visually literate. And I was speaking to some guys who lead up Canon photography, and they were saying that photography right now is going through a big growth spurt because now suddenly people are looking for more beautiful things. The expression now is in the visuals. So I think you've got to package all those things together, and don't think that once you put it onto Kickstarter that it will virally spread and suddenly within 3 hours you're going to be fully funded. It's hard work, and it can be gut-wrenching to get halfway through your campaign and now you've exhausted all your family, all your friends, your little network of people. They've already exhausted all that. And you start to lose momentum, and that can be really gut-wrenching. And I went through that. You've then got to make sure that you've got your connections that you've worked hard at whilst you did your book, and that's where the LinkedIn, being a part of conversations on LinkedIn, looking at work by people like what's his name, Christopher J, the Mohawk. Anyway, there's a very famous marketer out of the States who's the first listed marketing company on the NASDAQ, and I'll give you his name. And he was an expert on LinkedIn marketing, and I followed a lot of his processes to build my LinkedIn network so I could call upon them when I had the journal come out. And also working Twitter is really important, and or whatever your social platform is. So I think the thing you've got to set out a checklist of you got to get all these things right on Kickstarter, and then you've really got to work it. But it doesn't guarantee success, and there may come a time where you get halfway through it, the wheels fall off. You've really got to pick yourself up and have a second go at it.
So what was the end result of your campaign, if you don't mind me asking? How much were you able to raise?
We had just over $20,000 raised, which enabled me then to put the journal into production. And so we did that, and then it sold out 1 month later. So we did a second run, and now I think we're about to go into our fourth run. So and I've seen people, some people may only need $5,000, which is great. You see other products go on there, not so much books, other products go on there, and they need to raise $50,000 or $100,000. So that's a depends situation. But work out what you require in your own mind. And I'd say don't set your targets too high, because I found that once your target gets met, people are more likely to back you because they know this thing is going to go into production. So you got to think about that as well.
How long did it take to raise the $20,000?
A month.
And do you remember how many people contributed to that?
No, I don't actually. I don't recall that off the top of my head, Paul. No, I don't.
As you can tell, we like to dig on this stuff because I think what you've done is amazing, but it's also very tough to do. So the fact that you have raised $20,000 in a month, I think is very impressive.
Yeah, it was. I learned a lot from it. The other interesting thing that I would caution people on, and this was something you don't hear talked about, is that once you get on the campaign, if you choose to use Kickstarter or Indiegogo, whatever platform you choose to go onto, beware, authors, that there will be people coming from out of the woodwork, and lots of them, suggesting they can help you and guarantee you get funded if you spend money with them.
Ooh.
So you will see marketing companies, you'll see digital experts, you'll see all these people come out of the woodwork who suddenly say, Paul, I can see what you're doing. We love your product, and we've got a network. We can guarantee if you pay $495, we can get you to your target. And of course, when you're halfway through the campaign and the wheels are falling off because you've exhausted your small network, should you not have a big network, it's really tempting. And I fell into that trap. These people had the videos, the background, the testimonials, the whole thing. And I paid the money and heard crickets. Yeah. And it was a ghost town. And they had a guarantee, got to the end of it and said, this did nothing for me. I never saw anything, never heard anything. Yeah, but that guarantee means, it's just, and of course they're on the other side of the world and you've done it. So Take caution, folks. If you choose to go down this track, you will get inundated with people wanting your money who have a very, very compelling argument to say it will work. Just take real caution.
That is mind blowing. That you're actually the first guest we've had that's talked about that aspect of it, because I didn't even know that. I didn't realize that there were companies out there that basically are doing marketing for Kickstarter campaigns. That's crazy.
And man, they're good. I mean, I got to say, I don't think I'm a complete dummy, but these people put a very compelling case forward to you. You're at a point where it's starting to slow down, the contributions aren't ticking over, and you're only halfway to your target, and you've got no one else to talk to because everybody you know really well, you've done your emailers, you've done all these things, and they hit you at the right time. And I'm not talking one or two, I'm talking 1, 2, 3 a day are coming through, and some of them are really, really compelling. They're so well put together, they look so professional, they've done their work. Suddenly they got you at a point where emotionally you're starting to struggle and doubt yourself and doubt the campaign. And of course, once you put yourself out there on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, you've told everybody out there, they can go and look at your success. They can see where you are today. And we fear failure. And these are the things where they prey upon you. And I'm just putting caution out there because I fell for it. Make wise choices, because we don't have the coin to throw around.
Well, I really appreciate you making that point, because as I mentioned, you're the first guest that's really talked about that. And that's a scary thought, that there's people out there that are going to pull stuff like that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's flip the script a little bit. Let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I never like to follow the rules. Can I give you two?
Sure.
So the first one, which is an amazing book, is by David Goggins, called Can't Hurt Me. And the reason I love it is I didn't buy the book, I bought the audio book. And it's 13 and a half hours of content. Apart from the fact the book is fantastic in terms of the content. And if you, as an author, want to be the best you can be, this is a book that will really have you look in the mirror of truth to say, what's holding you back from the next level, and what lies are you telling yourself? It's an insane book. However, the reason I really love it is because the audio book, being 13 and a half hours, was a combination of David reading he had a guy read the book for him, and at the end of each chapter, they would then do a podcast. So the guy, the narrator, would read the book, and they'd finish and say, now, David, tell us more about that. And then David Goggins would do another 20 or 30 minutes of stuff that was in the book that frames that situation and adds more content in. So the reason I like it is that it is the first time I've heard a book done as an audiobook, and it became a bestseller on Audible. Number two is that he was offered, I think, $300,000 by a publishing house for his story, which is something you spoke about. And he said, no, I've spent my whole life building, it's my story. I've spent my whole life building a story. Why am I going to give it away for 300 grand?
Yeah.
So he self-published. Now, he had an incredible network across the world because he had great content, amazing stories, and he'd built this incredible network, and he took himself to number one on every list just by doing socials. It's a really interesting case study for any author to go through. Apart from the fact it's an insane book, I listened to it twice. There's 27 hours, and I think the guy's really on the money. The second book I would give you is Legacy by a guy called James Kerr, who is a Brit. And I interviewed him last week for the Mojo radio show. And I've got to say, you get some of these shows where you speak to somebody for an hour and they never waste a word. And that's James Kerr. His book is basically going behind the curtain of one of the world's highest performing and consistently successful teams. It's the rugby team of the All Blacks from New Zealand, who have Well, there you go, mate. They got over 80% winning success rate.
Yep.
Decade upon decade upon decade. And this book is absolutely fantastic for anybody as a sports fan, as a business person, as a leader, because it shows you how through the generations they've maintained this standard. What makes an All Black an All Black? At a player level, a team level, cultural level, and even at a country level. And it's all the highs and lows. How do they maintain and sustain this excellence? And he is brilliant. The book is just wonderful. Highly recommend it. And I think it's just gold from page to page. So there you go. There's two.
I think I'll be checking out that book in particular. I'm a huge All Blacks fan. In fact, for some of our motivational seminars, I show a clip of the rugby team doing the haka right before the World Cup final from a few years ago. So I absolutely love the All Blacks. In fact, the World Cup is this summer, so looking forward to seeing that, and hopefully the All Blacks will repeat. We'll see.
Well, we'll see, but it's interesting. James will take you behind what is the haka, like what's behind that. Why does a player, a team, a country, the support crew, why does everybody rally behind the haka? What's behind the totems, the humility? Where does that come from culturally? It's so much richness in what makes an All Black when a player pulls on that jersey, and for life. If you're an All Blacks fan, you love your rugby, mate, you will absolutely love that book.
I think it's my next thing to do. Well, for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I collect quotes, so it's not fair for me to go through. I've got so many. I each morning I'm looking for new quotes, but I've got to say that probably the one that I think one I found recently, which resonated with me personally, and I think resonates with this conversation for authors, is wolves don't lose sleep over the opinion of sheep.
Yes.
And I think in this day and age, we tend to flock and mob with the sheep. And we need to be the author who steps away and becomes the wolf, who's prepared to lead, have an opinion, provide dissension, be the person who challenges how people have thought about things for decades and or generations, to have a true point of view and have the courage to write your true story, be authentic to yourself, and step away from the sheep. And I think once you write that book, if you are able to be contrarian and put your own thoughts into the world, then you've got to understand that not everybody's going to love the book, and you can't be listening to the other sheep who haven't ever had the chance to do it themselves. And I just love that quote, is that if you're a wolf, which is what we need more people to step out and lead. Don't lose sleep over the opinions of people who shoot from the grandstand. Don't listen to them. And if anything else, when you're telling a story, be prepared to step away from the herd, the mob.
Absolutely. That's my philosophy too. That's one of my favorite quotes. Because,
oh, really?
And it's so true. Well, there's a couple of variations. There's that one. There's another one that a wolf doesn't concern themselves with the opinion of sheep. But, it's exactly right. You got to be on your own path. Who cares what anyone else thinks? You want to dissent. Have your own views. I've got very strong views, as we talked about prior to the show, about publishing and about marketing. You can't be afraid to share those views and make sure that you have those opinions, that you sometimes have to go against the grain.
Do you know, it's interesting. Our radio show, the Mojo radio show on iTunes and stuff, we first started because I used to work in radio. My producer used to work in radio. So back in the day, we worked in a rock station together. And I got tired of hearing podcasts that didn't add value, were poorly produced, had no depth of content. And I said, why don't we create our own show? This is going back 6 seasons ago. And from day one, we produced a radio show that we'd like to hear on the radio. But what's really interesting, Paul, we got 2 seasons into it, and my producer came to me and said, you can now get these analytics. So we should start looking at the analytics to see where people come out of the show, what they like, what they don't like. And I said, you're falling in with the sheep, because now you're starting to produce a show that you think will be liked as being a show that we're producing that we think is great, that we love. Let's be Nirvana. Let's not be Kylie Minogue. And to this day, we still produce just a show that we believe is the best we can possibly do, that will push production, content, questions where shows don't go. But you get so tempted to follow the sheep and start looking at data and statistics, which takes away your artistic integrity. So I'd say there's a commonality between writing, producing and putting out a podcast, theatre, art of any description. So I agree with you, mate. I think it's just, and I think we need to lead our children down that path because our kids are growing up and we are producing more sheep and we're producing less wolves, and it's not going to end well for us.
I agree. I have the same philosophy with my show. The only thing I care about, and same thing with the books, is the power of one. I get the opportunity to help one person, then I've done my job.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Just go to the website, mate. Gary Bertwistle, BERTWISTLE.com, and it's Gary with one R. It's a pretty unique name, so you'll find me pretty easy. And from there, you'll get to the journals, the books, the Mojo Radio show, my blog, all that sort of stuff. It's easy.
Well, Gary, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thanks, mate. Privileged being here.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.